our webinar, Happiness, Insights into Successful Product Management Careers. My name is Jim Semick, and I'll be moderating today. And today on the line, we have an expert panel of product managers and product management experts. We have Candice Yono from who's sitting in Chicago right now from Pivotal. We have Kevin Steigerwald from Portland, Oregon, and he is with JAMA Software. And we have Suzanne Abate, and Suzanne is with the Development Factory, and she is joining us from Los Angeles. Is that correct, Suzanne?
Sure am.
That's right. This webinar is brought to you by the Product Stack. We're a fellowship based on supporting product managers, and consider us to be your product management support group. This community was brought to life by 3 companies: Product Plan, Pivotal Tracker, and JAMA Software. And if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to check out all of our products, but more importantly, go to theproductstack.com, where you can watch our past webinars and also join your peers on our public Slack community, Product Stack, and help each other out. And to get started, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, and then I'll do some introductions. We'll do introductions of the panel group before we get started. My name is Jim Semick. I'm one of the founders of Product Plan. I've been in product management now for almost 20 years, taking several B2B SaaS products from concept through to market launch. And these products include GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, the product that we're using for the webinar today, AppFolio, which is an enterprise software company, and now my current company, Product Plan, which is product roadmap software. And to get started, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of overview, and then we'll do some introductions. We're going to be talking about happiness. We're going to be talking about what makes product managers happy. We're going to be talking around what exactly is happiness in product management, and then we'll talk about how to get happier. We'll talk about maybe some happiness hacks for product managers, and we'll be sure to do a live Q&A at the end. We're saving time for that. But I'd like to make this an interactive discussion, and so at any point along the way here in the webinar, use the question section of the GoToWebinar panel that you see on your sidebar there to ask questions. And as time permits, I'll pepper in some of your questions, your live questions, into our panelists, and we'll have a great conversation. And we don't have a lot of slides for this webinar, and so at any point, feel free to make the slides smaller so you can see our faces a little bit bigger, and join us in the conversation. So to get started, let's do some introductions. Let's start with you, Candice. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself and some of your experience.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name's Candice. I've been working for about 6 years in software, first as a product designer and now as a product manager. In that time, I've also worked as a people manager and consultant. And I'm currently working as a remote PM for the Tracker team.
Fantastic. And Kevin, tell us a little bit about your experience.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Steigerwald. I'm the Director of Product Design at JAMA Software. I've been in product since 2008, 9, somewhere around there, in different shades and flavors. So I started off as a UX designer, became a product manager, started my own company, and then we got acquired, and I'm now here at JAMA, happily, as the Director of Design. And so yeah, I think I have a pretty good range of, different size companies and different positions within those, transitioning between positions, and all that stuff. So excited to dig into this conversation and share more of that information.
Yeah, that's great. You do have a wide variety of experience, and so I'm looking forward to that. And Suzanne, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Development Factory?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne, co-founder of the Development Factory. We are a product consultancy based in Los Angeles. We work in a deeply integrated way with both startups and mature businesses to help them launch new products into market. And I've done that for dozens of startups over my career, or to sort of refactor and replatform existing products or launch ancillary products within an ecosystem for established businesses that are already sort of working within a product modality. And some of you may recognize my voice from the 100 PM podcast, which I also host, which is I think why I got wrangled into this conversation, because not only do I have over 10 years of experience in product management and product strategy, but I have had the great privilege of interviewing over 100 product managers from around the world and product leaders from around the world, including our amazing host, Jim Semick, all about what their path into product management and what it means to be a product manager. So I'm sort of a proxy representative for all of that insight as well.
Yeah, and I'm really eager to hear more about your experiences working with all those product managers and learning through you about them and their experience about becoming happy. And I will say you do have a lot of experience around training product managers as well. And so very much looking forward to the conversation.
I forgot all about that. Oh yeah. I do a lot of coaching for enterprise level organizations, and I've worked historically with General Assembly as well on campus. So I've taught many product managers on their way in and on their way from project manager to product manager, which might be something that gets surfaced in the questions today. I don't know.
Fantastic. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I'll start off with a little bit of introduction and a poll. I'd really love to find out about who is joining us today. If you could just take a few seconds and answer this poll. I'd love to understand how many of you are in product management, working today in product management, and whether you're an executive, some of you might be in engineering. So take a few seconds and complete this poll. And that'll give me better perspective on what sorts of questions we're talking about here. Okay, so as expected, the vast majority of you are in product management. You're part of the product management team. You might be in user experience or a product owner, for example. Some of you are executives. So this is really good to hear because this is going to help us refine the questions that we ask our panelists. So fantastic. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. I do want to give a little bit of an introduction to my experience in product management and becoming a happy product manager. As I mentioned, I have almost 20 years of product management experience taking products from concept to market launch, and through that experience, I believed, and I still believe today, that product management is the best job. It really has these fantastic aspects, and for me, it uses a lot of the skills that I have. It is, it's a job that really stretches me. It's a job that is creative, and at the same time, there's a little bit of stress involved in it, which I think for a lot of us is a really exciting thing. I think the product managers in general tend to be fairly optimistic people, and they really thrive in some of the chaos that product management presents to us. But several years ago, I was working as a product manager to launch some enterprise software, a new enterprise software product. And I really felt like I was at a pressure cooker. I was stressed out. I had long days and nights of work. My days were filled with a lineup of engineers asking questions. There were meetings all day long. I was doing backlog grooming meetings, and you know the drill. If you're in product management, you know how stressful sometimes it can become. I was at the same time as conducting these meetings and doing the backlog grooming, I was conducting customer discovery calls. I was reviewing prototypes with customers, trying to understand what to build. I was working on some mock-ups and doing story mapping, and of course writing user stories and working against all these deadlines to launch the product. And I was not having fun. I was not happy because of all of that pressure. And then as time went on, I started to do several things that took the pressure off of me. And so I want to tell you about some of those things, and this might spur some interesting conversations later. One of the things that I started doing was I declared what I call backlog bankruptcy. There came a time when I realized that everything that was in the product backlog was not going to get built, and there was just no way that I can envision, given our progress and given how what our learnings were about what the product needed to be, that we were going to develop everything that was in the backlog. And so what we did was we decided to draw a line on in our backlog and actually deleted everything in the backlog, because what that was doing was creating this underlying stress. As I looked at the backlog, as I groomed that backlog and prioritized, it was creating this stress, and stress throughout the organization too. So by actually deleting the vast majority of these stories in the backlog, it relieved some pressure. I also stopped tracking every little bit of customer feedback. I realized that trying to keep a list of everything that I was hearing was really counterproductive, and trying to keep that organized. And I started to adopt this philosophy of, if it's important enough, it will bubble up to the top. If it's important enough, it will get done. And so that also took some pressure off. And then because we were developing a new product, and it was taking, of course, longer than everyone expected, I began to think about minimum viable product. And I started to ruthlessly cut back on the requirements for the product. And I stopped having this perspective that it needed to be perfect. And as a result, we shipped the product. And that in itself, getting to that process and shipping the product, it allowed me to step back and take a different look at how I was doing things. And then taking that perspective and these new processes that I had as a product manager, I also started to take better care of myself. I started to take more time to myself. I stopped working the long days. I started to, of course, exercise now that the product was shipped. And as a result, I became happy again. So it was a combination of perspective and process change. And I'd like to have a discussion around that today. So that's my way of an introduction to some of the things that we learned in a survey that we do every year at Product Plan. So this year is our 5th year of conducting a product management and product planning survey. And this year we actually introduced some questions into the survey around job satisfaction. And you can download the results of this survey at productplan.com/report. And the survey, we surveyed over 2,500 product managers around how they do product planning, what their roadmaps look like, what gives them great job satisfaction, and also what causes dissatisfaction in their organization. So I want to share a couple of those things for you before we begin the conversation. The first thing is, I thought this was fascinating, that 9 out of 10 product managers believe that they are likely to stay in their current role. And I think that that is really telling. I don't know what the stats would be for other occupations, but I suspect they would be less. If we were to go to other occupations around the world and survey their likelihood of wanting to remain in that job, I think it would be significantly less than what we would find with product managers. So I think this is really telling that product managers really love what they do. And even though they may be slightly unhappy in their current job, they want to continue in product management. Another indicator of satisfaction is satisfaction in their current role. So you can see that that the average happiness, and this is on a scale of 1 through 5, is 3.8, which is, I think, fairly positive. It's a fairly positive sentiment around someone's happiness in their current role. And as you can see, we have almost 70% of product managers saying that they give their current role either a 5 or a 4. And so I think that's really telling around job satisfaction in product management in general. So they must be obviously very happy, challenged in their role, and other indicators that they're happy in the job of product management. So something else that we also asked is, what are some of the things that you like least about your job? And as some of you might expect, there are some indicators of job dissatisfaction. And I think a lot of us can relate to this, that a lot of people are dissatisfied with the internal politics that get played within organizations, having to deal with maybe some stakeholders who are particularly strong in their opinion around what needs to be built, and needing to navigate that. And we can talk about that today as well. I think we got some audience questions before the webinar during the registration that pointed to that. So I want to make sure and talk about that. Having to be reactive rather than proactive when developing strategy. That's another indicator of job dissatisfaction. And then lack of resources and some other things like being stressed and burned out. And of course, product managers always need to deal with the time constraints that they have. So I thought this is really interesting. And if you want to learn more about job satisfaction and some other indicators of what your peers are doing, you can download that product management survey. So with that, let's get started. We received at least 150 questions from you during the registration, and I see other questions are beginning to pour in as well from the audience. So I'm thrilled to get started. But to get started, I'd love to ask you this question. You have a question section in GoToWebinar here, and I'd like you to, if you just pop in what your thoughts are about what gets you out of bed in the morning. What makes you really excited to go to work? I'd love to see some of that. So if you could just pop that in for a few minutes here, or a few seconds rather. We can see some of these coming in here. I'm seeing some okay, some of you are pretty funny. Some of these I don't know if I can read, but people are popping in answers like the people that they work with, the craftsmanship that they have, the excitement about getting things done. My kids screaming in the morning gets them out of bed in the morning. You're pretty funny. Watching new ideas come to life. And a lot of these really resonate with me, and I think they probably resonate with some of our panelists too. The opportunity to do something new and something exciting is a really compelling reason why I get out of bed in the morning. So fantastic. Thank you all for that. And I want to come back to those a little bit later. But to get started, I would love to start asking the panelists here this morning. I'd love to hear from you, Candace, to start. What gets you out of bed in the morning, and what gets you most excited to go to work?
Yeah, I think some of the things you're reading off already touched on what I'm going to say, but collaboration is a pretty key thing that I really enjoy. I think when you come together with everyone from the different disciplines, like working with design, working with developers, with support and marketing, and when you have a problem and you're all coming together to solve it, I love seeing the different perspectives and the different takes that everyone brings to the table and how that kind of comes to help shape some solutions that like no single individual would have been able to come up with on their own. And I think that's where a lot of excitement and energy comes from, continuing to push forward towards the goal, outcome, or whatever the team is working for.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of it for you is the team, and I'm seeing responses like that from the audience as well. That the team that they work with is part of the reason why they love their job. Kevin, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What makes you excited?
Yeah, so hearing your story, Jim, made me kind of think about this a little more, and it reminds me of there's a famous quote. I don't know if it's by a famous person or not, but the quote goes that a ship is safest in harbor, but that's not what the ship is made for. And so it just kind of reminds me, a product manager, for them to be safe or just content and not dealing with the chaos, that's not what a product manager is really designed for, right? There's obviously that balance, and you talk about it and finding that, or letting go of the idea that everything has to be perfect. But for me, I think what attracted me to product management and what's kept me in this industry and excited about it and gets me out of the bed every morning is knowing that there is going to be a little bit of chaos today, and every day is different, and I have different problems to solve, and I have to coordinate with everyone in the organization. I'm not going into work and just talking to one person all day long of, how do we fill out this report, or do we need to sign all the checks today for accounting? It's like you get to talk to account management, you get to talk to customers, you get to talk to sales, you get to talk to the CEO sometimes. I think there's just constant movement and energy, and I think you need to learn how, and I think this conversation will shape that, is how to thrive in that chaos and find the right balance. And that for me is what, still keeps me coming in every day.
Yeah, that's great, and you've really touched on that chaos element, and I'm eager to hear from Suzanne about whether she sees that as a pattern in product managers. Do you see that in yourself, Suzanne?
I think that's just at Kevin's organization. I don't think anyone else experiences that. Yeah. One of the things I talk about a lot, actually, I like to talk about this on the podcast, is how much most of the time we're not doing as well as we think we could be, and we're always worried about how well other organizations are doing against it. So yeah, absolutely, it's chaos everywhere, and there's all instances, from metrics, from what we're tracking, from how often we're pushing out features, where we're never really doing it as well as we think other people are doing it, and they're not doing it as well either. So everyone can just relax about it. We all kind of suck, basically, in the best way.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who famously doesn't like soup used to describe like why she hated soup, and she said, it's just like I put my spoon in and it's like same, until it's done. It's just the same experience over and over. And the thing about product management, and this is like why do I love the job and what gets me out of bed, is it's never the same. Every single day is going to be a different kind of thing, because there's going to be different tasks that you're facing or different fires that you have to put out. And for those of us, like in my role where I work consultatively, so I'm exposed to a lot of different businesses and a lot of different products, there's even kind of another layer on top of that, which is, wow, new business context, new specific set of circumstances to overcome. And so if you're the type of person that gets easily bored, it's pretty easy to be a product manager, pretty easy to be happy as a product manager, because the job just kind of makes sure that you'll never be like same.
Yeah, exactly. I completely relate to that. Every day when you walk in the door, it's going to be something new. Sometimes it might be a shock, but it's something new every day, and I love that. And my role has shifted quite a bit. I'm no longer a day-to-day product manager. I'm now have a company, and yet there are so many similar elements to it, where in the startup world, for example, there's that constant change, and that for me is really exciting. And one of the things that I have found to be really rewarding is the idea of making customers happy. And we got a question in from Stacy, and she asked the question about is happiness satisfaction when you get your end users starting to use the product? Is happiness when you find product market fit? And I think that's a really good question. How much of happiness is derived from making your end users happy? And I'll ask that question to Kevin, because you were involved in a startup, you launched a product, and how much of your satisfaction as a product manager was derived from making those customers happy?
Yeah, it's interesting. As everything, it's going to be an onion of layers here, but was I happy finding product market fit? Absolutely. And when you're starting a company, is that one of your main, if not the main goal that you have for those first couple months or years, or however long it takes you? Absolutely. But I don't think I attached all of my happiness to just that concept, right? Like, I think some of those other things that we've already talked about, or the idea of coming in and solving a new problem, bringing something, the first time we shipped our code to a live production environment, right? Like, that was an incredible moment of happiness for me. Ironically, it happened while I was in the delivery room with my wife for our first son. So maybe it was a blend of the two moments in my life bringing me a lot of happiness. But I think, I don't know. I would be nervous if someone told me that the only thing that was going to make them happy is finding product market fit, because I having gone through enough of these experiences, I think there's going to be times when you have it, there's going to be times when you don't, and when you don't have it, you have to find other things that make you happy, because you still got to show up for your job. If your goal is to find that product market fit, then you still have to be happy along the way. Otherwise, you going back to kind of what you were describing of just the stress and the pressure cooker, that's an easy one to just let it cloud all of the other good things that are happening in some of the day-to-day interactions and even just quarterly goals and things like that. So
yeah, that's a really good point, that there is some intrinsic happiness. And I'm curious, Suzanne, if you've identified any patterns in product managers as you've interviewed, through the podcast and other interactions that you've had, how much of product managers are there's just this intrinsic happiness and optimism, and how much of it is derived from accomplishing, and how much of it is derived from making customers happy.
Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, Kevin, I so appreciated your comment too, because actually, what is the statistic? Like 1 in 10 startups find product market fit, and then probably some significant percentage of those end up falling into Death Valley when they try to scale the business anyway. So if we were actually to link our sense of happiness or self-worth to our company achieving sort of the holy grail of success, it would be a very sort of dark path ahead. So it's like, yes, find things to be excited about along the way. And I think this relates to your question, Jim, which is, what I think product managers get excited about, what I hear all the time. So in the podcast, I do a segment called, get the job, learn the job, love the job, right? So I've had 100 people tell me, like, what is it that they love about product management? And unanimously, the top answer has always been the joy that comes from people using or deriving benefit from your product. But here's the thing, that doesn't have to be people at scale. If that's what gets you excited, that's awesome. But that could actually just be, I went from an idea to putting that idea into market to solving a problem for a single person who had it. And keep in mind too, with enterprise products, you don't necessarily have a lot of customers. You might have a lot of users inside. So the numbers don't really matter as much as like, what was your why? And did you find some sort of reconciliation for that on the other end of a milestone that you accomplished?
Oh, that's really, really great. Those are great thoughts. And as I have, as we've all worked with products, we've often dealt with customers who weren't happy with the product. And we just got a question in just now from Michelle, and she's asking, how do you suggest changing the behavior of a product manager so they're not so stressed about customer feedback? And Candace, I'm gonna ask you this question. As a product manager, I'm sure you see all sorts of customer feedback, and some of it is maybe a little bit negative about the product. Maybe it's something you can work with, maybe it's not. But how do you manage your stress? And do you have any suggestions for us about kind of managing that stress around negative customer feedback?
Yeah, so I definitely get the stress of getting all of that feedback. Internally, we have a subscription to an email where whenever customers send feedback, I kind of get a notification about it of like either what they like or what they don't like. And often it seems like there are more like what they don't like or what's going wrong for them. I think what I try to look for is I just kind of have to accept you're not going to be able to solve every problem. It's just impossible. And I think if you can kind of go in with that, it's less of seeing like every request that's coming in as something that you have to fix. So mentally, I look for the themes. So, if we're seeing a lot of like one particular thing, then like I'm going to dig more into that and see if that is something we can go after. But like these smaller things that come in, like, yeah, it's hard to have to say like, I'm just not going to fix that problem, but you can't fix everything. And so I think going in being realistic about what you can tackle kind of helps. So the lenses of high level themes, of what aligns to what your current objectives are, whether it's for the business, the user, whatever is going on there, to try and align also the feedback that's coming in to kind of those high level themes.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Can I add to that? Because I think there's another angle that is worth looking at, and because it's more of then a potential cultural issue with the company. Maybe it's not just the product manager, right? That obviously as an individual, maybe they're just stressing about feedback to something that they built, but maybe the organization itself isn't designed or set up to allow for a build, measure, learn mentality. And if you have product managers who are highly stressed out, perhaps it's based around the idea of there's fear that, hey, I just built something, customers aren't using it, am I about to get fired? Or, hey, we built something that was approved because we knew that there was some product value or some validation behind it. What we shipped maybe was an MVP and it's not getting traction like we want, but let's measure, let's learn and iterate and build again. And I think, as a product manager, we get taught that, and all blog posts and conversations and webinars, everything is kind of about this agile environment: build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. It's not always seen or recognized, I think, at companies where the ask from the management or the organization aligns to that. And so I think some of that stress could be coming from that. So I would also encourage, I agree with everything Candace says, but I would also encourage you, if that's happening, do an internal reflection on just how are we set up as a company to encourage this behavior.
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. Okay, let's start talking a little bit more about some tangible ways that we can, and maybe some hacks for improving our job satisfaction as product managers. But before we do that, I'd like to do a poll. I'd like to find out from our audience their happiness level in your current role. So if you could take a few seconds here, and 1 is I'm not happy at all, and 5 is I'm really happy with my job. And I'd like to see how well this jives with our poll and with our survey. Take a few seconds here, and the results are continuing to come in. I'm going to have to do some math on the fly to see what the average is here. Okay, so it looks like the highest number is 3, so medium satisfaction, and then an equal number are giving it a 4. And so if we were to look at this, we would say that roughly 45% of you are happy in your role. And so that's good to hear. I don't know what the math is for that in terms of, averaging out to our 3.8 that we found in our survey of 2,500 product managers, but it looks like it's fairly close. So let's talk a little bit about what it would take to move all of you in the 1, 2, and 3 bucket to get into the 4 and 5 category. Let's talk about some ideas around that. We're getting a lot of questions in live right now around communication. We're getting questions around communicating with team members, and maybe I just saw a question come in about toxic relationships. We got a question in from Namratha about how can a product manager improve communication with engineers? And this is I think a really important topic, because one of the top skills of product managers is to be able to communicate effectively, to be able to create alignment within the organization among all their different stakeholders. Product managers aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily report to these departments, and yet they need to be able to collect information, have a good relationship with those stakeholders in all the different departments, to be able to say no effectively and still maintain a good relationship. And so why don't we start with you, Suzanne? I'd love to hear your thoughts about some techniques that product managers can use to improve their communication, specifically with the engineering team.
When I get called out like that, it makes me think I wasn't listening and I'm in the back of the class and I feel triggered again.
I can repeat the question if you like.
No, but I mean, there's so much inside of that specifically. So is the question how to communicate better with engineers? Is it more macro? Frame it for me and then I'll answer it any way you want.
Yeah, her specific question was, how can a product manager improve communication with engineers? Yeah. So you can take that, in any direction you like. I think there definitely is a bigger, there's a bigger question. There are a lot of questions within that, but maybe you can provide some of your experience about ways of improving that, maybe that day-to-day interaction.
Yeah, I mean, communication is a topic I have a lot to say about for sure. I think specifically with engineers, it's funny that it's always the friction with engineers. And yet, as product managers, we interface with so many different types of stakeholders, right? So if we were going to, first of all, to get along better with engineers is kind of like saying getting along better with the business people or getting along better with the designers. There's always sort of a certain amount of generalization that happens there. But one of the tactics that I teach in classes in particular is to leverage a tool from the user experience design world, which is empathy mapping, as a way of getting outside of yourself. So if you're not communicating effectively with engineers, the question isn't, have to go inward and say, what am I missing? Well, are you yourself connected with what is their why, right? What are their stressors? What are the things that they get excited about? What are the ways in which they learn and process information and communicate, and how is that different? Why the empathy map is such a great tool for this, for those of you who know, who have been in those exercises or who do it, is because you really are making explicit, what does that person sort of think, feel, hear, and do? And it's so amazing when you kind of start to talk and think like an engineer. You're like, oh, I get it. These are people who could spend 12 hours solving a single problem, people who've lost days and sometimes weeks looking for one missing semicolon in thousands of lines of code. It's just such a different world that they're in, and it matters a lot, but it matters differently for us because we're focusing on other things. So I would say start by seeking to understand who these people are, and then I actually think the problem will start to solve itself a little bit on its own. And then of course there are other specific things you can do and specific things that work well with engineers, but I don't want to do all of the work for the listeners, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that empathy mapping is an interesting concept, and I'd love to learn more about that. Candace, could you describe a little bit about how you work with engineers on a day-to-day basis, and some of the ways that you interact with them and have a great relationship with them?
Yeah, I do. I really love what Suzanne was saying about the empathy mapping. I think that's definitely really important, is sometimes when challenges come up, trying to get at like why there might be frustration, or like understanding what their motivation and drivers are, definitely resonated with me. But on another level, I look at the engineers as partners. So in a lot of the more technical work that we have to do, I reach out to them all the time for questions, and the engineers in my team are awesome and really willing to sort of like have that conversation of being able to like break things down. And so it's kind of presenting for them. It's like, hey, help me understand so we can all like solve this problem together. So really, yeah, looking at them as partners is kind of one of the things that I use on my team a lot. And I think that helps us because they understand, like, I'm trying to understand like what they're looking at, and then they're trying to like frame it so that they can bring other people to help them figure out like, how can we all move forward?
Yeah, that's great. And Kevin, I'm going to change the question a little bit for you
Sure.
because of your experience. We've been talking about interactions with the engineering team, but you're in a role now where you're interacting with executive stakeholders. And do you have any suggestions for interacting and having a dialogue with executive stakeholders to increase alignment and in turn just making it a happier experience?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer Suzanne gave is kind of universal. Is you have to have empathy for whoever your audience is that you're speaking with, and so much of a product manager's role is then speaking with, again, everyone internal and external to the organization. And so when you're talking up to executives, I think you need to understand what are they looking to get out of this conversation, right? And ultimately, or oftentimes, I guess, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I guess I have to, they're looking for just the quick, short answers. They want to know, is this going to be a problem, or how big is it, and is there a solution already in place, and what do you need from me to get it done, right? And so I think that's important. That last little blip there is important to remember, is they're there to help. And so if you're coming to them trying to communicate, hey, we're having a problem with the release, or we're having a problem with the way that this team is performing, or we're having a trouble with a specific customer, they don't want to just have you unload your baggage or your needs to them. And so you need to come in with an ask of, here's the problem, here's what I need from you to help resolve this. and here's what I'm going to do once I have that help, right? Make them aware that, or ensure them that you're on top of this issue, and that, yeah, that if you need their help, you're being direct with the ask.
Got it. Okay, that's great. I have a live question that just came in, and Candace, I believe you're a remote product manager. You're working out of the Chicago office, is that correct? And we just got a live question with somebody who is in a similar situation, and I'm not going to name her, but she says she's the only remote member of her product team, and she lives in the US, but her development team is in a different country. And she says most of the time I end up playing catch up, and due to the lack of other product managers on my team, I end up getting stressed out and I'm not satisfied with my output. And how can I become happier in such a role? And she also adds that her organization and her product are really awesome. So she believes in the company and the product, but working remotely has some challenges. And I suspect others in the audience are in that situation where they're working remotely. Do you have suggestions for improving happiness?
Yeah, it can definitely be challenging. I'm one of only 2 people who are remote on the team. Everyone else is co-located in Denver, so not dealing with as big of a time difference as working with an international team. But what I can say is I think one of the things I find really valuable working remote is the balance of having the time for so I start earlier than my team, so I have that time in the morning to be able to catch up and figure out what I need to do, maybe catch up on what I might have missed from the day before, and then finding times where both of the teams overlap. So I don't work exactly the same hours of them, but the time when the teams are overlapping, I'm using that time I had before they started. I kind of have my, like, what do I need to get from certain people? Who do I need to communicate with? Who do I need to reach out to? And I think I'm able to do that during the times that we do have overlap. That's what I find really helpful, is then we can, instantly get messages, and like if we have a question, we're just kind of like online at the same time, which I know can be tricky with international time zones. So definitely requires a little more flexibility, maybe on both ends, of kind of like trying to meet in the middle to be available at the same time.
Okay, those are good techniques, and I've worked remotely before as well, and for me it is doubling the amount of communication that I have with a team, almost over communicating is a way of ensuring that the relationships that you have with these people is consistent, and that for me has always helped.
I can throw one in that's like highly tactical, and maybe whoever asked this question is already employing this tactic, but we work with and have worked through the years with a lot of offshore teams and individuals as well. And one little thing that saved us over and over, and sounds so silly, is our daily digest. And it's basically just a journal that think of it like passing the baton back and forth between the time shifts. But so what we do is when we're exiting out of our time zone, this is by the way different from whatever asynchronous communication is happening inside of Pivotal Tracker or Jira or whatever sort of ticket tracking software you're using, because that's obviously specific to the issues. This is just like, hey so-and-so, or hey everyone, bullet. It's context. And that's the thing a lot of the times that's missing, right? Is like, here's some context. Today blew up. Something big happened. Someone is panicked about this. This is now a priority where it wasn't. I know I told you to finish that ticket, but I want you to pause everything and put your attention here. And then the developer teams or whoever is working offshore does the same. And so that time you spend chasing down stuff actually just becomes the first thing that you do at the outset of your shift, which is check in with the digest. What comments did they make in response to? And then you can use that to sort of situate what are the most important problems that you're going to have to combat as a result of the team already being offline or going offline imminently.
Okay, that's a great supplement to that. Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, so we're almost ready for some rapid live Q&A. I'm going to ask one more question that we got, and if each of you has any sort of and this actually came from a question during the registration. Will asked, how can you build on happiness or lack thereof? What are the hacks of the trade that help put a smile on your face? So maybe Kevin, we can start with you. Is there any sort of ritual or anything that you do during your day that helps improve your happiness just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a couple things. One is very practical that everyone can do. Is I find time for myself, and I do that by going to lunch alone. Now, I agree. Going to lunch with a friend or a coworker can also be awesome, and so periodically I will do that. But normally I try to keep my lunch block open, or just, I guess not open, closed, just for myself, knowing that I always have that break in my day if I need it, right? If I'm having a stressful morning, or if I know I have a lot to get done in the afternoon and I just need 30 minutes to kind of clear my head, that's my time. I can go off, I can listen to a podcast, I can read a book, whatever I need to do to unwind. Another good thing that I do, and then we try to encourage some of our teams to do this through stand-ups. At the end of my day, I kind of always write down, what did I accomplish today? But then I also start to outline, what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to get done? And that helps me whenever I do end my day to just kind of like stop thinking about work for a little bit, because I've already written down, this is what I need to get done tomorrow. I don't have to have random thoughts pop up in my head when I'm trying to have dinner with my family and spend time with the kids. And then when I get in the morning, it's not a stressful first hour of trying to figure out what's all the stuff that has to get done. I've already done that. I've outlined it. I can, easily start to go through my list if I have spare time. So yeah, I would recommend if anyone's having stress or feels like they're in a pressure cooker situation, try that at the end of the day. Just write down, here's what I'll accomplish tomorrow, and see how that works.
Yeah, great suggestions. Candace, do you have any tips for product managers, small things that you do that help relieve stress and make you slightly happier?
Yeah, I think so. For the first, I'm going to piggyback off of what Kevin was saying about taking time for yourself. I definitely think breaks are really important, and I think recognizing how you're actually taking those breaks. So, sometimes I realize like, oh, I'm going to take a break, and then I hop on social media or just start reading articles. But when I don't actually like get up and physically like walk away from my workspace, I recognize that like it doesn't feel like I ever had a break because I've stayed in the same space. So whether it's you need to get up and go for a walk, you need to get up and talk to a colleague, go make a phone call, but like actually walking away from where you're doing most of the work makes much like clear cut break and division between like, now I can step away from what is work and go find something that might like offer some sense of like rejuvenation or break from what you're actually doing. And then I think the second thing is when you're sort of in that like pressure pot situation, it can feel like everything is just like so dark and dire, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I think what that requires is maybe taking a step back and reflecting on a little bit of like, what are the things that bring you the most happiness in the work that you are doing, and how can you create like more time and space for those things to seek out those opportunities? So like, where are those moments like, what are the things that are like bringing you joy almost in your workday? Is it collaborating? Is it talking to a certain person? Is there a certain activity? Like what is it? And how can you try and like fit more of that into your day?
Yeah, great tips, and that really resonates with me as well. Just for both of you, Candace and Kevin, talking about creating space in your day. I think it's a really critical thing, both for creativity and productivity, but also for general happiness. Suzanne, do you have any tips, either that you use personally or that you've seen other product managers use that help improve happiness?
The one for me, and again, I agree entirely with Candace and with Kevin, but the extension of it is protect your time. And what I mean about this specifically is, and everybody in an organization experiences this, it's not specific to product managers, but we all want to like spend time learning. As an example, we're like, oh, I really wanted to learn something new today, but then I got all caught up in my email, or like, oh, I really wanted to. And so the bottom line is there will always be a distraction. There will always be a fire. There will always be something that comes up. And if you don't really like, I'm a big proponent of time management, a big proponent of time blocking in particular. And if you don't map out in your schedule and say, like, I am backing out these 2 hours or these 30 minutes absolutely for this thing, and protect it fiercely, you'll never do it. And the implication to that has a lot to do with like your career trajectory and where you want to go, because suddenly you're like, you know what, I spent 5 years working at this company and I invested none of my time in making sure that my skills were still marketable, making sure that I was keeping my edge. And so you'll have to decide what you're, what it's fair to do sort of within work hours versus outside. But I think the principle remains the same. Granted, this is a luxury for me because I'm an executive and I can make my own schedule, and I mostly focus on building my business now. But I wake up so early, and I used to just wake up and then start working right away. And now I block out that 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. time slot. It's like, that is my time to read whatever it is I want to read, or take the dogs for a walk, or take myself on a walk, but absolutely not just start working, because I'll keep working and I'll still be working. And so protect your time.
Yeah, and that's, I'm a big believer that unless you proactively manage your time, someone else is going to manage it for you. You know, your day is just going to get filled up if you let it get filled up. And so I think that knowing that as product managers, we can choose how we spend our time. We can say no. And I think this is a big part of product management, is being able to say no, not only in terms of the product and how to create the right product to build and not making this feature bloated beast, but also protecting ourselves, protecting our time for that creativity, for that learning, that career development that you just talked about. So I think that's incredibly important to know that you have a choice and to protect your time. So I think that's really great. All right, so let's go ahead and let's do some live Q&A. We're going to do some rapid fire questions here in the last few minutes. The first question, I'm gonna point to Kevin, and this is from Jacob, and he says, what aspects of the job that are enjoyable do you think that would be an easy introduction for other departments to share in that satisfaction? And maybe along the way, shifting some responsibilities. For example, he says, helping customer success learn how to find the return on investment for a particular feature request that the customer really wants. So are there some techniques that product managers could do to kind of share in the joys of product management with other departments?
Sure. So the hitch here is the word enjoyable. The first thing that jumps to my mind is not always an enjoyable task, but it's prioritization. And something that we do here with defect prioritization, or even some feature or work order prioritization, is we get customer success and others involved in that process. And it's not then ultimately only our decision or responsibility, but we are as a team deciding, is this defect more important than that one? And so I guess ultimately that would lead to more happiness for the PM, because it's shouldering some of that responsibility, but it's also teaching the rest of the organization that, yeah, we do want to fix every defect, but sometimes that your throughput is your throughput, and we have to prioritize one thing over the other, and here's how we have those discussions and conversations and decisions. And so the more you can show others how to do your job, or how you do your job, I think the more empathy they'll have back for you.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. The next one I'm going to point to you, Suzanne, and I'm not going to name this person, so I don't want them to be identified here, but it's a live question that we just got. It's, how do I push back on the business's unrealistic expectations in a way that shows you're a partner and also want the business to succeed? So it gets back to that politics concern that a lot of product managers have.
Yeah, this is a big one. This gets asked a lot. The first is, well, okay, what I'm going to say to push back on the person who asked the question, anonymous question holder, is like, you're suggesting that the expectations are unrealistic, but that already implies your idea of where they're coming from. So you have to be aware that you've got a bit of a blind spot. You're like, these people have crazy ideas and who do they think they are? And maybe you're not saying that. But the point is, like, we have to check our own blind spots and say, okay, seek first to understand. So when you are given an expectation, or when someone has set an expectation, maybe you don't think it's feasible or not, first let's understand, well, what was the goal? What was the reason for that? Once we kind of dial into what is the reason, we actually can create a place from which to start assessing things like compromises or adjustments, because once this is sort of like the whole philosophy behind OKRs, right? Is just once you set the objective and the key result, you give people a lot of room to figure out how to solve it in between. It's kind of a similar thing. So what is it that they're actually asking? Why is it important? What are the implications if it's not met? If they have to make a compromise, what are they willing to compromise on? And if they're not willing to compromise, then you can use one of my favorite lines, which is, if everything is important, then nothing is important. And I'll just decide the order in which. And then that'll usually, or however appropriately you need to say it, depending on the hierarchy of things. But start with a conversation and make understanding your primary goal.
That's a great answer. So it really does start with the why you're doing something, those OKRs that you've set, maybe the goals or the strategy that the company has, and working from there. That's great. Well, we have time for one or two more questions, and the next one is for you, Candace. It's a live question that we got in from Osvaldo. He asked, what's the best way to communicate to key stakeholders what we're doing and what's in the pipeline? Maybe you could talk a little bit about how how you prioritize and how you roadmap, and then how you communicate that strategy in the roadmap.
Yeah, so I think, for me right now, internally with key stakeholders, we've set up a regular cadence for when we check in for updates. So we do that bi-weekly. When we started doing those, it was kind of both figuring out what did I feel I needed to push in case there were things that like I needed to get more information, and then also trying to understand what was the information that the stakeholders were looking for, what did they need to help inform their understanding. So I usually use that time to, whenever possible, I love to demo things or actually pull in, like visuals of what the team has actually been working on. If we've done any type of like feedback sessions or things that are coming in, I love to pull that into evidence of what people are saying about the product. So I guess part of it's like really trying to ground it in like what's actually being done. I'll kind of organize into key themes. And then for, I guess, like prioritizing, so that happens outside of our, so like when I get a new track of work or there's a new feature, it's working with those stakeholders to understand what are our objectives, what are the outcomes, let's align on that. And so that kind of becomes a key theme in all of the checkpoints that we have going forward. So the work that we're doing, always tie it back to, hey, this was what we were working on, and here's what we're doing to make progress towards this end outcome that we had talked about.
Okay, fantastic, and thank you for that. And it's about time for us to wrap up. I just want to see, Candace, do you have any last parting words of wisdom for the audience around more job satisfaction or?
Yeah, I think one of the things just to keep in mind is remember to look for I think those like moments of joy or what makes you happy, or to focus on. A lot of it is just shifting your thoughts. So like if you are in a tough spot, it's remembering that there's a lot actually in your control of either how you frame a situation or the steps that you can take. So maybe remember that there's like a lot that you can do to make yourself happy.
Totally agree. Kevin, any last words of wisdom or nuggets you want to share?
Yeah, so my career, I've changed roles or positions, and I even started in advertising. And before I ended up in product, but every change that I made was always self-directed. And so I think the feedback I would give is that, beyond just happiness, it is so important to know what all of your values are personally, and it is worth looking at and evaluating those on a constant basis, because the things that did make me happy, 10 years ago, and the reason I got into a specific job or industry, changed over time. And so if you just think, well, why am I no longer happy? I still love this. Maybe it's you actually don't love that specific thing anymore. And so I would just encourage everyone to, do some internal reflection along the way. Write down your values and keep track of, do those things change over time?
Great advice. Suzanne, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, the word is commit. And what I mean by this is understand why you're in that role, make peace with it, and then show up to it 100%. And like, by the way, it's okay if you're just there because it's a good paycheck, but then respect that it's a good paycheck, commit 100% to it the time that you're there, and protect your time outside of work and do the things that you love. And if it's something that you love doing, then man, commit to that too and make and ship great product.
The fantastic way of ending this. Thank you all so much for your advice and your experience. I thought it was a great discussion, and I really wish that we could have gotten to more questions. They were just flying in. Thank you, audience, everyone in the audience, for participating. And if you want to continue the conversation, please join us at theproductstack.com. And if you'd like to download the report that we mentioned, it's productplan.com/report. And so with that, thank you all very much and have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.